The Connector Next Door is your invitation to meet the natural connectors all around us. They represent the everyday event planners who are energizing their communities every single day. Their stories are familiar, fun, and full of charm. Your host, Lisa Garrow, is a lifelong event planner and has been a connection strategy coach for over a decade. She knows events can become energized connecting points where communities can gather and grow. Let's listen in as she strikes up a conversation with today's Connector Next Door.
Richard Lee Tai doesn't feel he's a natural connector, but he's fascinated by people. Over the years, he has learned the skills to both connect meaningfully with others and has become an advocate for those that want to learn to do the same. Richard is a TEDx speaker, connection consultant, and co-author of Become Your Superself, Connect with Yourself to Connect with Others. His TED Talk, How to Find Excuses to Connect, outlines how people can make meaningful connections easier. People never grew up with a class on how to make friends, so his work focuses on lessening the gap in social health education. As a professional speaker and associate certified coach, he empowers individuals and organizations with the social skills and confidence to make meaningful connections for the rest of their lives. Connections can happen anywhere, anytime, so he continues to encourage anyone he sees to find excuses to connect. In our conversation, Richard shared that every person you pass by has their own rich story. All it takes is initiating a conversation to enter into that world with them. His ultimate vision is to create a world without loneliness. Welcome back, everyone, to the Connector Next Door and to a really special conversation with Richard today. Welcome here. I'm so glad that you're here to have this conversation about connection with me.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me to this, Lisa.
I think we could talk probably for a couple of hours around connection, because when we met, now I'm trying to think of where we actually met the first time. It was at a friend's workshop.
Yes. It was our mutual friend, Kim. She was hosting a workshop about creativity and productivity. I met with Kristen, and then Kristen's like, you need to talk with Lisa because she's also a connector. And then we connected, and then we saw each other at a conference too. So
yeah, it's like this whirlwind, getting to know each other over the last couple of weeks. And I was really intrigued because when we first met, you were talking about your business, which is Excuses to Connect.
Yep.
And it was so incredible to me when we think about connection, there's so many perspectives out there. And we were talking about some of the research that is starting to emerge in that area as well. But this idea of excuses to connect, I want to chat with you about that sort of as we go through this conversation today, because sometimes we feel like we are in a space where either you're a connector or you're not. Well, that's not my personality or something like that.
Right.
So I'd love to chat about that. But before we get started, I ask everybody right off the bat, tell us, Richard, what does connection actually mean to you? How would you define it?
So two thoughts immediately come to mind. Because one is like, okay, there's probably a standardized or like operationalized definition for connection for people that do research around this, because like, what is it? But yeah, let me talk about, I guess, what it means to me. Connection is like when you're having a conversation with someone and they just get you. You feel the sense of presence and energy and reciprocity, that there's some emotional intimacy there, that they're opening up and being vulnerable, and you get to know parts of their story, and it's a warm feeling. I'm a very feeling type person. I know Brene Brown has a definition of connection too. It's similar to what I described. It's like the energy that's shared and that you get strength and sustenance from the relationship, and you feel seen, heard, and valued. So yeah, it's all of that is, I think, components of connecting.
Yeah. And I think too, like when we talk about the emotion or the feeling, and so some people feel like they don't feel like connecting, or they don't feel like they're a great connector, or they feel like we'll leave that to other people. Tell us about Excuses to Connect, because when what is it that would sort of prevent you from wanting to connect? Like if you
Yeah.
need an excuse to connect, it means that you're probably not naturally stepping out and wanting to connect, or maybe that feeling that you get or what you described
Yeah.
isn't quite enough
Right.
for somebody to actually do the work of connecting.
Yeah, thanks for asking this question, because in a way, I actually don't think I'm a natural connector. It's something that I've
Mm,
built up over time as a skill set, but also an interest in it.
yeah.
Because I grew up feeling quite shy and lonely. And one thing that I'm quite passionate about addressing is that there's a gap in education and awareness, because I never grew up in a class with a class of here's how to make friends and here's how to
If
communicate
only, hey, you and me
effectively.
both.
And so it's like, where do people learn this then? Because certainly you can learn it if it's modeled to you from your parents, but in my case, I really actually didn't see my parents like going out to new events and meeting new people and
Mm,
developing those deep conversations. They sort of stick around the groups that they're already familiar with, and so that wasn't modeled to me. And then I looked to media of like books and TV shows, and I shared this in a workshop recently that you were at, Lisa, but it's like this misconception that the main character has their best friend or a group of best friends, and I thought that's what I need to have, because that's how friendships and relationships were being portrayed to me. So that was my
mm-hmm,
source of education. But I
mm-hmm,
realized later on that that's not quite accurate. So for sure some people have best friends, but there's lots of different friendship structures, and also it's not healthy for me to expect any one person to fulfill all my social needs.
mm-hmm,
So it's like there's a systemic issue to this too. Certainly some of it's on the individual to take responsibility to put themselves out there, but there's also larger factors as to why someone might have barriers when it comes to connection.
mm,
um, some of the individual factors, there's this concept I've come across recently called rejection sensitivity. So
mm,
what that is around is there's some people that have a predisposition to sort of anxiously expect that they're going to be rejected. They're just waiting for it to happen. And they
mm,
also interpret neutral stimuli as negative. So, for instance, if I text someone and they don't text me back, I'm going to go to the worst case scenario, like this person hates me. That's why they're not messaging me back. It's something like I'm blaming myself. It's my fault. And the sad thing is, like, this develops as a coping mechanism in our childhood, where if we grew up in a household where we're not feeling entirely safe or secure, and the parental figure blames their kid for their being upset, then the kid learns
mm,
like, oh, I now need to be hyper vigilant of the mood of the other people around me and be super careful about what I say or do, because I don't want to piss them off. And you start walking on eggshells and becoming invisible and avoiding any potential type of conflict.
mm-hmm.
But what happened, like, it's a survival mechanism, it's adaptive, but what happens is a child can carry that same type of rejection sensitivity into their adulthood, and then that acts as a huge barrier to connecting, because you're still drawing from these conclusions from childhood, and any slight sign of rejection just makes you shut down or overreact. So
Yeah,
there's a lot of barriers to it. Like, connection is great,
interesting.
it's a great feeling, but there's also lots of legitimate barriers to it. It's not as
Mm-hmm.
simple of like just go to the event and talk to people.
I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. And it's interesting too in the excuses to connect.
Yeah.
It seems like maybe that's a function of our mind and setting our mind to something before we even feel it, before we're sort of in the zone where we're in a flow, maybe of conversation, where we have to make maybe a decision that we're going to step out or we're going to talk to that person. And
Yep.
you were mentioning the workshop that you led the other day, and that was just a fantastic, I think, unpacking of what does connection mean. But you also talked about lollipop moments,
Yep.
and so tell us about how somebody then can move into, given the
Yeah.
excuses to connect,
Yep.
what does that actually mean in your environment where you're saying it's possible, it may not be comfortable?
Yeah. I see it from the perspective of it's a skill. Like, we literally use the word social skills. So it's a skill
Mm,
to develop. Or another way of seeing it, it's a muscle you exercise. You go to the gym to
Mm,
exercise your physical muscles, and it's the same with social skills. It is something that you can practice. You can apply a
mhm.
growth mindset to it. People are not permanently socially awkward or socially inept or whatever. It's something that you can work on. But also recognizing, as I said before, like these systemic factors, like everyone's at a different starting point right now. And
Mhm, mhm.
also you have global events like the pandemic that forces everyone inside, and then everyone's social skills are a bit rusty because you haven't seen each other for a
It's true, yeah.
while. But yeah, certainly then how do you develop those social skills then? One tool I found really helpful is this idea of a fear ladder. So imagine there's a ladder and there's different rungs to the ladder. And each of those rungs are associated with a different level of fear. Let's say on like a scale of 1 to 10. So say my goal is like, I want to be more socially confident. If I tell someone like, hey, just approach a random stranger and strike up a conversation, that might be a 9 or a 10 on their fear ladder, where it feels
Mm,
so like that's such a big leap for them to take that it doesn't feel actionable because it's just
mm,
out of their depth. But if I ask someone what's their 1 out of 10 on their fear ladder, so what's something that's still slightly outside of their comfort zone but feels doable, then that's a very procedural way you can practice your social skills. Because a 1 out of 10 for someone might be me messaging a friend that I already know and asking, hey, can we meet up for coffee? Because I know that the chance of rejection is quite low because we already have a connection there. Um, Thinking about what's the 1 out of 10 on your fear ladder gives people a structural way to practice these social skills, because you do that 1 out of 10 behavior enough, and then that becomes now part of your comfort zone, and then you move on to 2 out of 10 and 3 out of 10. Because
mhm.
nowadays for me it's quite normal to approach strangers and just strike up conversations, but I know I did not used to be like that. It's been a lot of skill development.
Yeah. It
Yeah,
almost honors all of the steps, though,
yeah.
too, right? Because it doesn't mean that that first step is any less important
Mm-hmm.
or any less of a connection or any less of a way to open up sort of your window of feeling, that feeling that maybe that coffee has been accepted, or that you have partially a good conversation, or maybe it's short, but
Yeah.
it's the action itself. So the next, I often talk about the next best step,
Mm-hmm.
because you're not going to know everything you need to know to get where, maybe your perception of
Yep.
what a really great friend group would be,
Yep.
or what does true connection actually mean, or get into a relationship or whatever that is. There's so many steps towards
Mm-hmm.
whatever that's going to look like, which I think that I love the ladder analogy. It gives people that opportunity to say, what's good for me, but just feels a little bit, like I'm taking a bit of a risk.
Yeah. Yeah. And that way too, you don't have to like beat yourself up and compare like, oh, this person is so great at this and I'm still so stuck or far behind. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's meeting people where they're at and recognizing that, like, even celebrating the effort that you put in or the attempt, because it
Mm.
takes a lot of courage to put yourself out there. I, Even when we were at this conference, for example, there was a speed friending exercise at the very beginning, and
Yeah.
I got a little jolt of anxiety too when they were like describing like, oh, you're about to like 5 minutes find someone and you just start a conversation with them. So
Right.
even for me as someone that's quite, I guess, practiced in this, like there's still times when I feel anxious too.
Right. And for all of us, right? Because we're not going
Yeah.
to know every situation that
Yeah.
ever, like, there have been many events that I'm sitting in the bathroom stall and I'm taking my deep breaths and
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
like,
exactly.
I think I just need to sort of have a moment to myself so I can get back out there,
Yeah.
and for whatever reason it's feeling uncomfortable, so I need to just kind of center myself back and say, okay, we've got this, it's okay, and I can
Yeah.
do anything for an hour. There have been events like that.
Yeah. And I guess, and for any of the event organizers listening, it's worth considering that too, because like everyone has a
Yes.
different comfort level when it comes to connection. If you
Yes.
just throw a bunch of people together in a room and it's like, hey, big goal. Like for some people, that's gonna be quite paralyzing.
I can
Um,
totally see.
as the facilitator, how can you make the experience more accessible for people?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's interesting when you say that you don't consider yourself a natural connector, that you've had to grow into this and build up the skills and the
Yeah.
courage and whatever it is. But what was that like? Do you mind sharing kind of what was that like for you?
Yeah.
Or was there a turning point for you where you actually needed to make a decision for yourself that you needed to step out? Like what was the catalyst that made the change for you?
Yeah, for
It's
sure.
clearly a passion now. So
Yeah, I think it's gradual. I've come across a few phrases now that have really resonated with me that I want to share. So one of them is my mess is my message. The second
Mm,
one is finding purpose in predicament. And
mhm,
then the third one is healing the hole in our hearts.
mm,
All of them point to the same thing of personal struggles end up often being the driver or motivator for the type of work we do. And that's very much my case, where it's like, because I had these experiences of childhood loneliness, I think consciously or unconsciously that drove me to find sense of connection and community and want to
mhm.
develop skills within this and now have it be the center of my work.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a few key experiences for me. One was moving away for university. I was born and raised in Calgary and moved to University of Lethbridge for school. And when I got there, I didn't know anyone. So I needed to start from scratch, which was a challenging experience because I was surrounded by people. I
Mhm,
lived in residence, had hundreds of people in the lecture halls, but still felt out of place and very surface level connections. It wasn't the same depth of connections that, with people I've known for years back at home.
mhm.
And social media doesn't help either because you compare yourself with other people like, hey, this person's going to this event or this party and I feel left out because I wasn't invited to it and I'm
Mhm,
just sitting home alone. So that doesn't help either. So I felt like I was really suffering alone with this, that it seemed like I was the only one going through this. And it wasn't the case. um, I'm very inspired by a project called Humans of New York, which for
mhm,
listeners that don't know, the idea is there's this photographer who he just approached strangers and got to know their story and took a photo of them and then posted it online with a photo and a caption of their story. And it seems so simple, but it's caught on. It's like a whole movement where his platform itself has millions of followers, but it also inspired like other places in the world to have their own humans of insert location. And
mhm.
so I had been following Humans of New York for a while, and I got the idea of like, what if I did something like that? Because I had an interest in photography and writing and
Mhm.
this desire to find community for myself. And so I started what was called Humans of ULeth, so for University of Lethbridge. And so I started interviewing people I knew, uh, and that gradually expanded to being referred to other people, but interviewing like students and professors and staff. And I remember even after having a 30 to 40-minute conversation with them, that's when I felt connection, that I've gone to
Mm.
know them on a deeper level because I know their story, like the adversities they've overcome, their aspirations, how they've gone to where they are today, stuff like that.
Mhm.
And I remember interviewing some upper year students as well, where I again perceived that they had it all together, but they did
Ah.
not. And I asked them, like, what was your first year experience like? And they said, I felt lonely. I had a hard time making friends. I felt homesick. And that's when it clicked for me that it wasn't just me. There are other
Mm.
people experiencing this, and there wasn't anything wrong with me too, because there's a lot of like self criticism going on.
Yeah.
Like, this is my fault. Like, why am I, not more outgoing, and what am I doing wrong? But in
Mhm.
reality, it's that a lot of people had the similar first year experience, and it's just not discussed enough. And if it
Mm.
would more normalize, then there wouldn't be this stigma that's going on. That people wouldn't feel a sense of shame to say, like, oh, I'm struggling with this right now.
Mhm.
And so that's what planted a seed with me of like, we need to have more conversations like this, because I was not the only student that's struggling with loneliness, but
Yeah.
how many people would feel more comforted knowing that they're not alone in that this is actually a normal experience that people go through. One way that loneliness is described, it's like a biological signal, just like hunger and thirst, where if we're hungry, that's a signal we should eat, and if we're thirsty, we get water. And loneliness is a signal, hey, we need more social connection. So it's really our bodies and mind's way of protecting us. So it's not a bad signal. It's nothing to be ashamed of. So yeah, that's what planted the seed for me, where like I struggled with this. I don't want other people to struggle as much with it. And how can we make these meaningful connections easier? And my largest vision in life, like, how can there be a world without loneliness? I know it's not quite ever achievable, but that's my North Star aspiration.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. And just like you said, in school, we're not taught, or there's no class on how to make a friend. And same thing with post-secondary, same thing when we go to work or we get a new job, or, I know people that are, I'm over 50, but you change your career, or you change your friend group, or you move somewhere. There really is no conversation. There's an assumption that you'll seek out the people, or you'll find your people. I think you showed a video. It's like, oh, you'll find your people. And I have had the experience that I probably have had to seek out more than they just get attracted to me.
Oh yeah, yep.
It has felt like work, but I think in the end, a friend actually challenged me once, because I was really struggling with the word friend, because friend has been watered down and kind of elevated and all twisted around. That what is a friend these days? It's just different. And so he challenged me and said, well, what word then could you use instead of friend? Like, because I'm like, well, I do have a lot of great connections and people that make me feel connected. It's like, well, why couldn't you just call them connections and not friends? And it changed the game for me too, because then it's like, oh, you mean it doesn't have to be this box of like what you were saying on social media, everybody has their friend group, or that's your best friend. And I've never had that kind of experience before. So, so it did change the game, but it's so interesting that you actually used a form of connection, very deliberate connection, out of that feeling of being lonely or feeling disconnected, that you were almost put yourself in a curious space. To see, I wonder what kind of stories I might get, and that would have been a catalyst for you. So interesting.
Yeah, because simultaneously it's a passion project for me, simultaneously as a way for me to find connection for myself, but also to show that every person I'm just fascinated by people. Like every person you pass by has their own rich story, and all it takes is initiating that conversation to enter into that world with them. And so certainly that was something I was curious about too. Like every person I passed by in the hallway, I'm like, who are they? What's their story? And wanting to build a sense of community through storytelling. That again, it's people are not alone. There's common experiences in just being human. At one point I had a chance to interview the president of the university, which was a bit intimidating because I'm like, oh my God, he's just spending time with me as a lowly undergraduate student. Also took a little while to arrange. I need to talk with his executive assistant and find out when it is busy schedule. Anyway, all that to say, my sort of apprehension behind it quickly dissolved, because he's human too. We're more than our job titles. So once he started sharing about his personal experiences, I could relate and connect with him. So also recognizing that, or sort of reframing that barrier to connection too. Sometimes we can feel like people are inaccessible because we perceive that there's this distance between us, that they have this job title or all these achievements or this wealth or whatever, but they're still human. And they all still want to be seen, heard, and valued, and they're struggling with something, whether you can see it or not. So good point. Even if they're succeeding, quote unquote succeeding in one area of their life, there's other parts of their life that they're struggling with. Yeah, connecting on
And it
human
is
terms.
that equalizer in a way, right? Because
Mhm.
then it just becomes a conversation between two people. It's interesting in the presentation you did, you actually had uh, I'd love for you to chat about the project at ULEF as
Sure.
well,
Yeah.
but there was one shot that you had, or photo you had of a ping pong table that was
Oh yeah.
part of what you call your rec room project there.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about the Rec Room project,
Sure.
and what did you find when you started putting that in motion, given your own experience, how others started to adopt that and show up and use these corners of the building or of this property
Mhm.
that were really built for connection.
Yeah, for sure. So, what Lisa's describing, the REC room, REC is an acronym that stands for Refresh, Energize, and Connect. And so, this is an initiative that I helped to implement at the University of Lethbridge as a way to respond to like students being back on campus, but their mental health is not doing that well, and loneliness is at an all-time high, and there's very low
Mm-hmm.
turnout to events, and people are finishing classes and just going home. So what was a way to address those issues? And so the university conceptualized this idea of a rec room. So it's essentially play spaces that we put in different spots on campus, where we bought ping pong tables and a giant chess set and board games and puzzles and coloring supplies. So as a way for students to intentionally take a break and have a chance to connect with new people and have fun. And the thing is, like, we all have an inner child. Sometimes we forget as an adult, we're so
Mm-hmm.
burdened by our responsibilities that we lose track of that. But there's something quite fundamental to just play and the importance of
Mm-hmm.
play. So we were announcing our new chancellor at the university. And so they wanted to host that announcement rather than just in some stuffy formal room. They're like, let's host this
Mm-hmm.
event at the rec room. So they did their
Ah,
announcement there. And then right afterwards, people could play in the space too. And so
yeah.
then you had all these like different staff and students and administrators and professors just playing ping pong or playing chess together. And it doesn't matter, because it's like we're just here to have fun. It doesn't matter what your job title is or how much you're getting paid.
Yeah.
It's yeah, we're coming together for this activity just to connect with one another. So I think there's something very powerful to that
Mm-hmm.
yeah, cultivating that sort of inner child and nostalgia. I'm all for incorporating this fun and play into our daily life too,
Mm.
because it just opens up a different type of thinking too. It's just like
Mm-hmm.
more creative and imaginative, and you don't have to feel so burdened by existing ways of thinking.
Yeah. Well, and one thing that I really love about what you did with the Rec Room was it was available 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't assuming when people would show up or how they're going to necessarily use what was there, who they were going to come with. You know, sometimes as event planners, we plan every possible corner of connection, and
Yeah.
we've kind of programmed the heck out of the whole thing, that there really isn't any breathing space for
Mm,
our attendees to actually integrate themselves into a space or
right.
into an activity. And what I really love about it, it just feels like it has that airy feel that you can go sit on a beanbag chair and work on your laptop, or you could
Yep.
be, you know, sitting there while a friend is playing chess with a giant
Yeah.
chess set, or maybe on the ping pong table meeting somebody that you wouldn't necessarily just hang out and have a conversation with.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
what a beautiful environment, where almost as a an observation even for you to see how people are interacting. And you've got some great stories. If you could maybe, we're kind of getting to the end of our
Yeah.
time here, but could you maybe share with us what the impact of those play spaces
Mm-hmm.
have been for some of those people that have been using them over this last few months?
Oh yeah, for sure. And I appreciate you highlighting this point too, where like these play spaces were meant to be self-managed. That doesn't require
Hmm.
someone to monitor it all the time. That
Yeah, yeah.
we trust that the community takes ownership of it and takes care of the materials there. I shared the side story of our queen getting stolen and being returned. But,
yeah, exactly. That's an awesome story. They'll have to reach out to you and ask for the lowdown on that.
Yeah, there's some shenanigans that were expected, but for the most part, it's been very positive. But yeah, I was collecting some data and feedback on this project through some QR forms, and one student shared how, very similar to my experience, where like their first month of being at the University of Lethbridge, they felt very alone. They didn't have any friends, but this is where they made their first group of friends, and this is where they hang out multiple times a week now, and it feels like a home to them. So that just signifies the importance of play and the impact here, because even another student shared that they were about to go like access counseling services, which they still can definitely, but then they found the support network through play, and now they're a regular attendee there. There's also self-organized chess community. Some people are really chess. And so they'll like, hey, I finished class at 3 p.m. today and meet me at the chessboard and we can play a game. Or there'll be more advanced players that offer lessons to the more beginner players, because some people don't know how to play, but people are really willing. It's like, I can teach you this.
I love that. And I think that there's such a neat opportunity for us to learn from, even though you say you're not a natural connector, I think you are now somebody, and we've been at a couple of events together where I feel like it is just part of how you show up, that there's hope for those of you out there that are listening and you're like, I'm not sure that that's me. And I like to be behind the scenes, and a lot of planners will hang back, or they're going to put the plan together and things move forward, but they're not necessarily seen. And just an encouragement that even as we are in events that are filled with people, and even if we've put that event together, that there are times that we might also feel lonely. We might also feel like we're disconnected from all the amazing things that are happening or our guests are experiencing. But what a cool way, I think, for us too, an encouragement for us as planners to step out. And what would that look like for us? What's the first rung if this is new for you? The other part of that is how do we include things like what you've included in the rec room, and trust our guests, trust the people that we want to serve, that they'll know how to interact, that they're going to step out or use something or sit on a comfy chair somewhere, and that there would potentially be that opportunity for deeper connection, even in a highly programmed event, that this is actually a possibility. And in the case of a post-secondary institution, we're working through the Recovery on Campus here at Candy to see how do we implement different spaces on campuses where students feel welcome and they feel like this, that there's some ownership, and it's not all about play. But if we want to study well, if we want to do well in work and in life, to have that playful experience of what we're going through helps us too.
Yeah. One thing I'll note as well that I didn't quite mention in my presentation, there were a lot of people that don't actually engage with the spaces, like in terms of actually sitting down for a game of chess or ping pong, but still noted that it boosted their mental health just to have activity in the area.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Because the space, a lot of the rec room spaces are positioned in high traffic areas where there's a lot of people that pass by it. And so just hearing and seeing people having fun and playing ping pong, like because it shows that there's some sense of liveliness and activity going on campus.
Yeah.
And so I found that interesting too. Even, one of my friends, she's like, I don't have time to play in the rec room, but I like live vicariously through other people. So
I
that's
love
something
that.
to know too.
Yeah, exactly. And that it doesn't, I think the exposure to that, just that feeling that it is possible, or there are people connecting, and that even if you choose not to, that, like you say, the energy around that can be contagious as well. That's a beautiful example. I love that. Thanks so much for sitting down with me. I know we've had some good conversations the last couple of weeks, and I'm so excited to kind of stay in touch and see where we can collaborate in the future. This might spark some things for people that are either they're feeling lonely and they just like to talk to you about your experience if you're open to that. But then also for some planners that are feeling like, I really feel like our events, they just don't have that sense of belonging and connection and community that we think, maybe we could try something new. How can they get a hold of you? And maybe if you could leave them with one thing today that they could start implementing in the next week, what might that be that they could take a first kind of rung step to having an excuse to connect better with their attendees or their guests?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll give a few different places you can connect with me. I have my email, which is richard@excusestoconnect.com. So feel free to email me if you're listening to this podcast. You can also find me on social media at Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn by searching my name, Richard Lee Tai. And I also do have a website, which is excusestoconnect.com. So this is your excuse to connect. This is your invitation.
There you go.
Say like, hey, I was listening to this, whatever number episode this ends up being with Lisa, and I liked when you said this, and I wanted to connect with you. So definitely open to chatting with any folks, whether it's event planners or personally. In terms of a suggestion or encouragement for folks on how they can apply this. I was thinking of something profound to say. I'll just find something more, whatever comes to mind. I didn't prep for this.
I don't mean to put you on the spot,
I'm trying to think of, like the fortune teller cookies of like.
Yeah, exactly.
Some witty one-liner. But I guess I would just encourage that. Think outside the box. Like there's so many creative excuses to connect out there that even like we didn't quite talk about it, but you briefly mentioned about lollipop moments. I handed out lollipops at my workshop, which sounds not typical, but there's a reason.
I still have it here.
Exactly. Or one of my friends, at the beginning of his keynote, he gets people to build a paper airplane and throw it. There's the purpose there too. There's there's games out there that are like deck of cards that have questions on it. So I actually I have like an ongoing catalog in my mind, and probably I should have in a spreadsheet too of like, here's all these different connection ideas that you could integrate. So that would definitely love to chat to people about that too.
Absolutely. I'm sure you'd have some great ideas. And I think that kind of brings up a really cool little point is the things that you at home might enjoy doing, or if there's a game you love, or there's some kind of a word play, something that you like to do, or some kind of activity, how could you integrate it? Because sometimes we overthink these things and we think it has to be something profound, or it has to be something larger than life, or nobody's going to care, or no one's going to do it. And what I found is that if you own a little idea and then you just adapt it simply into what you're trying to accomplish, tie it to the theme, people respond to that, because they really, I think we all feel like that we need almost permission to play. And so an encouragement, and thank you so much for that. I think having you as a resource and looking at what's around you right now, that you could maybe explore how could that actually integrate into my next meeting with the team or something like that.
Definitely. And I think one more last point to this too is like, kids know this. Like kids don't have to think about how do I play? They just do it. If you have the chance to interact with kids, whether it's your own children or you work with kids, it's like just observe how they play. Like what engages their mind and curiosity, and maybe there's a lot of lessons to learn from that too.
Love it.
Yeah.
What a great way to kind of end this conversation, just on the how do we observe what's around us? How are people playing around us? It's just been an amazing chance to get to know you. And again, I'm so excited about continue our collaboration and this conversation. There's so much more for me to learn about the research behind connection. That's something that you've been diving into fully. I will be putting the links in the description below so you can all find Richard when you're ready for that, when you're ready to have an excuse to connect or you want to find excuses to connect. Talk to Richard. This has just been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa.
The Connector Next Door podcast is produced by Candy Event Consulting, where everyday event planners and their teams gain clarity, get connected, and grow in confidence. Subscribe at www.candyconsulting.ca to hear visits with everyday event planners who are putting connections first.